In the last reading of this book, we had Comet, the goldfish, and Comet the goldfish was eating quite a bit and getting quite large and making, I don't know, a little bit of a mess. And so everything was getting kind of muddled and a lot of turbidity in the water itself. So what happens after that? And so here is the next story point here. One day, Comet was hungry and decided to explore the water past a pond he knew. He started to travel to another stream through an opening in the pond. And so here you can see pond number 1. This is the pond that Comet was in originally. And then through this little opening, Comet goes all the way down. And you can see the goldfish right here entering into a new pond, a lake, something larger. Okay, and if you, just to remind you from the first image, or one of the first images, and I think it was the second one actually, you can see that this path is here as well. So this was a zoomed up look at this pond ecosystem. Here's that little path that he took to go all the way down into that bigger pond. Okay, let's continue. Comet swam into a stream of rapids where the water was shallow and flowed much faster, carrying him downstream. He was unable to control where he was going. Finally, the rapids brought him to a new large lake where he saw many other fish and ducks. Comet hid from them as he did not trust anything easily. And then this picture, Nellie was able to color in quite expertly, and it looks quite nice. And I'll just give you a better look. We have this gorgeous night sky here too, and then splash into this larger pond. Now for the science part of this, the first thing is that I did look into to confirm, do goldfish really go from small bodies of water to larger ones? And it turns out, yes, they do. So that checks out. That is very good. Now, another species that is, I guess, negatively impacted by goldfish are the newts. And this is a beautiful drawing of one right over here. Now, if you remember from the science section from the last reading, here is a pond, and if you read it, it says newt dominated. And then once you introduce the goldfish, the pond gets a lot murkier and the newt population actually decreases. And the reason why is that the goldfish eats amphibian eggs. And so will eat the eggs of the newts, and so their population goes down. And I decided for the newts to put a few different interesting facts. And for those of you that may be just joining now, this is when goldfish are invasive. They're being, as a pet, released into a pond, ecosystem, or a lake where they don't belong. And as a result, there can be these negative consequences. Again, really the fault of the humans who are doing this. So first of all, interesting fact is that newts do release toxins. Some of them can be rather toxic from their skin. And some of these newts, some species of them, will advertise how toxic they are through their interesting patterns on their skin. Now, another very interesting newt fact is that if you cut off, for example, their arm, something bites it off or whatever, they can often regenerate it. And in fact, it's not only their arm, they can regenerate lost limbs, tails, and I can't even believe this. I wrote it, I researched it, so it must be true. But like their eyes, they can regenerate spinal cords, parts of their heart, even parts of their brain. That's pretty bananas. I mean, that is unbelievable. Now, typically when humans are injured, if my finger gets cut off from a chainsaw or something, that finger is never going to grow back. And part of the reason why is that at the wound site, scar tissue will form, which is good. It stops the bleeding, stops infections, things like that. But it also prevents regrowth happening. Now, usually, every single cell that we have, even this cell over here, has the full instruction set to make everything in your body. So my cheek cell can make, in theory, my liver or my eyes. It's pretty amazing. But once these cells mature in the human, they no longer have that capability of activating different instructions to make different parts of the body. And maybe there's a good thing for that, because you don't just want to be a spontaneously growing arm coming out of your face or something like that. But the newts are a little bit different. So when they get wounded, they go through a process that is called de-differentiating their cells. It's like their cells go back to being like a stem cell. And then what happens is that, like let's say their hand gets cut off, then there are particular chemical signals there that instruct those de-differentiated cells to start building that arm again. And here's an image of actually that happening. So you can see that right here, the arm or the hand has been cut off, and over time, just unbelievable, it grows back. Now, unfortunately, I had the citation and everything, I just must have forgot to put it there. So sorry to the scientists who did this, and I forgot to put your citation over there, my bad. Okay, now coming to the subconscious one, and just to refresh your memory on these images of my subconscious, as a very quick summary, the first image explored how ideas are formed in the subconscious and how they bubble into the conscious world. And in that process, I talked about Zimbers and how the subconscious, everything in it, including your trauma, is essentially a reflection of yourself. Why that means you to have self-love for your trauma, but also how to perhaps collaborate with it to create something. So those are some discussions we had in this, and that was all that this image in some ways was saying. Then the second image over here was talking about or exploring the idea of what happens when in the subconscious, those thoughts that go from the subconscious into the conscious mind, where the fish is the attentive mind, eating up all this stuff, is distracting. And so I call this distracting element the demon 5 minutes. Okay, and so this is the idea that distracting thoughts, looping ideas can sometimes emerge, and this image now explores how maybe those distracting thoughts are not always bad, and a lot of that complexity is what I wanted this children's book to explore. The goldfish is the hero. We're rooting for it, and yet it's doing the negative of damaging the ecosystem. Mosquitoes are bad. They suck. But at the same time, mosquitoes may have some positives. And so I try to provide this positive, negative look into everything. So let's see. Yeah, so I write, if harnessed correctly, these distractions, they can introduce a unique turbulence of uncertainty and unpredictability into the flow of destiny, ideas, and thoughts. This illustration also explores how the subconscious can influence our conscious mind's interpretation of reality, therefore changing the landscape of our subconscious. Therefore, changing the landscape of our subconscious can change how we experience reality. And so a lot of what I'm trying to say here is that what we are experiencing right now is essentially an interpretation of what's real, what's around us. To us, it feels like, okay, everything I'm feeling right now is real, but there's a lot of psychology and neuroscience work that says that our brain does a lot of processing on the information that's coming, and that processing can fundamentally alter what it is that we are experiencing. So you could imagine that if you could alter the landscape of your subconscious, and that's, if you look at this picture right over here, everything within the double layered membrane, which is in the shape of a womb or shape of an entrance into a womb or a third eye, is the conscious world. And then everything outside of it is a subconscious. So this is the terrain of the subconscious, which holds our interpretation of reality, but that can change. If you change the landscape, in this case it's lower down, it's bigger, it's different, you can change the way that you're interpreting reality. And one example of this in my other artwork is with things like depression. This is, both of this image and this image are exploring depression. This is the landscape on the ground of my subconscious, and the depression, is like is a dip or is a hole in that place. So if something negative happens to you, or if something happens to you and you're in a depressed state, you will weigh that more heavily as being negative. But to you, it seems like absolute reality. So this is just saying reality can change based off of what we do with our subconscious. Okay, let me just make sure I've got everything. The fish represents the attentive and conscious mind. The lines represent the flow of destiny, and therefore the different paths our life could possibly take in the future. And so the lines I'm talking about are these ones here. So you see how the lines going from here down all the way to here are all uniformly pointing in the same direction. And what that represents is when our mind is focused, when we're trying to get to a goal, it often feels good to have this focused mind. Here, distractions are really pretty negative because you're trying to get to this location over here. But over time, the negative is that this can become quite mundane and repetitive. And when you're trying to birth an epic idea, sometimes these destiny flow lines of unpredictability will bring us into new places. And those new places can be extraordinary if we allow ourselves to explore it. If you can harness this properly, you can really explore something new in this stability, but also in this uncertainty. And so that's the benefit of being distracted, if you can harness it properly. And let's see. That's right. Okay, but then also, of course, this can make it difficult to accomplish a goal too, if you're too distracted. So this is a balance. And then I finish off talking about snowflakes to describe why sometimes these meandering, uncertain paths can actually be good. When I used to be a high school teacher, I'd show the students these images of snowflakes. And the snowflakes that had the most branches, the most beautiful, were the snowflakes that traveled in a meandering path through the cloud, through different zones of temperature and humidity. Kind of talking about the idea that these meandering journeys can actually make things quite beautiful. And so having this very diverse journey through different places and things like that, these distractions can sometimes be good. That's what this is exploring.